Hey team, you're about to experience my interview with Jay Schneider. This is the second time he has been on B2B Commerce Corner. He is the founder of B2B Squared, a B2B commerce consultancy, and he is now the founder of Flywheel B2B. What is Flywheel B2B? Well, Flywheel B2B is a B2B focused marketing automation platform and services layer to bring advanced marketing automation to B2B e-commerce merchants. This is technology that has been sorely lacking in the industry for a very long time. He's identified the gap and he is looking to fill that gap as fast as possible with both capability and skills, but also a platform to make this easier for B2B brands to adopt. I hope you enjoy our conversation. It was a fantastic second conversation, and I learned a ton, and I think you're going to enjoy it. Welcome to B2B Commerce Corner. Commerce Corner is a sub-series of the E-Commerce Edge podcast discussing all things B2B commerce through the lens of agencies, consultants, merchants, and more. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Jay Schneider back to the podcast again. He was one of my very first guests when I started the B2B Commerce Corner sub-series of the podcast. I think he was guest number 1 or number 2 of that sub-series, and he's back again. Thank you for joining me again today, Jay.
Absolutely. Glad to be back and glad to be here a second time. Am I the first second time or?
You're the first second timer on the B2B series. So
Okay,
look, this
cool.
is fantastic. It's awesome
Awesome.
to have you back along for the ride today. And I think it was about a year ago that we had our first session together. I don't know the exact date. I'll have to look that one up. And in fact, I'll link to it in the show notes, that initial session. But a lot has happened in the world of B2B in the intervening time. A lot has happened in my life. Lots happened in your life. And you come from this heavy B2B experiential background, this B2B commerce background, have your own consultancy, B2B Squared. You've been working in the space. You are a true B2B commerce expert. And before we get into what you're doing now, why don't you tell me, maybe let's recap some of the big moves that have happened in the B2B e-commerce world since the last time we spoke, and your take on where B2B is at as of today.
Yeah, I think there's a number of things that are happening out there. I think I won't dig into the AI part of it just yet because obviously we've all got information overload on that a little bit. But I will say that I think it's been interesting to watch the discussion about microservices and headless as it relates to B and where that's going to end up. And I think my take on that is that we're headed towards still a platform approach with obviously everything being very API driven, things inside the platform being decoupled, like product catalogs and things of that nature, order management, et cetera. So I think that's one of the things that's coming down the pike. Obviously, it'd be impossible not to talk about all the AI stuff. Where is that going to play in the B2B space? One of the areas that we're using it, and one of the areas that I think has been really great so far, is that it's helping a lot with things like product data enrichment. It's making it much easier. It's making it much more doable for a lot of people, and it's making it faster. So those are all great things because faster in e-commerce is always better.
No question about it. And I looked up which episode number. You were episode number 1 of the B2B
Right.
Commerce Corner.
Okay.
That came out. That episode was released in the 3rd of May of
Okay.
2023.
You're sure.
And that was episode 211 of the podcast overall. So, man, you're old school. You're the OG. You're the original gangster of the B2B Commerce Corner. So it is
Okay.
awesome to have you back on again. And if I look back what happened in my own life since then, when we look back and we think about where I was in New Zealand, and that was before I had moved to Mexico, and there was a lot going on in the world at that particular point in time. But what I think has transpired from my perspective is that there is a definitely an increasing recognition that B2B e-commerce can no longer be ignored. And I feel like this is a replay of 2010 from the B2C e-commerce world, where the whole industry realized within the span of 1 to 2 years, it came like a flood in a very compressed period of time, where the entire B2C industry realized, oh my God, we can't not have e-commerce. Like, it's too big to ignore now. It's too serious to ignore now. There's too many buyers. So the TAM is too big now. The total addressable market is too big now for us to ignore. And there were some holdouts. H&M, Primark, there was quite a few big retail brands that famously held out until the
Hmm.
pandemic hit. And
Right.
there weren't a ton of them, but there was some big name brands that were holding out and said, we will never do e-commerce. We have focused on our physical store chain. Maybe we'll do click and collect, and that's as far as we'll get, but we will definitely not do ship to door e-commerce. And I can't think of a single case where those brands did not capitulate during COVID. And so it's super interesting to see that same sense of that FOMO, that fear of missing out.
Hmm.
I'm seeing that start to creep in to the B2B space. And I'm seeing this pattern repeat again, where I'm seeing more and more B2B businesses go, shit, we've got millennial buyers now on the B2B side, and they expect us to offer
Right.
e-commerce. It is what I would call table stakes nowadays for most B2B brands to offer B2B e-commerce. Have you seen that same evolution especially during COVID and then over the last year or so?
So I think it's a great thing to dig into on a couple levels. First of all, I agree with you. Obviously, the pandemic, I think, for a lot of B2B brands increased their e-commerce a little bit. Some who weren't in made them desire the wanting to get into it. But I think it's interesting because I really feel like we're heading towards this tipping point. And I wrote a blog that I'm actually going to rewrite, re-edit here. I think the original blog was in 2020 or something like that. I was blessed before I got into e-commerce, I was in media, and I was blessed to be in a couple of spaces, print as well as photography, when both were going through digital disruption. Print, we used to have films that we would use to before we printed burnt plates and then would print things from there. Photography, obviously, we had film, we took it to the lab, and then we got prints, right? That's all changed. And in both of those spaces, and I've talked about this a little bit at some of the places I've spoken at, in both of those industries, I remember being in early on and thinking, I'm surprised this is taking so long. It's pretty clear where this is all going, but I'm surprised it's taking so long. And it takes a while sometimes for supplier relationships to be solidified, for the technology to be stable, for and things like that. But then all of a sudden, what ended up happening in both cases is that overnight, all of a sudden, the industry was different. It was changed. And I see the same thing here. I really thought we would be further, for those of us who have been in this B2B e-commerce space, I really thought we'd be further than we are today. I look at the Grangers, the MSCs, and people like that of the world. They're doing fantastic stuff. They're doing the majority of their revenue is online. It's great stuff. I look at what the middle of the market looks like for B2B, and obviously, it's much further behind than that. So I'm surprised it hasn't become quite the leading revenue source for as many brands as it hasn't today. But I also think more than ever, we're nearing that tipping point. And I don't know, maybe you're feeling that too.
Oh, there's no question about that. And yes, I think the statistics in the United States, don't quote me on this, but I think DC 360 says that only about 40% of B2B brands in the United States even offer any form of digital commerce at all. And that includes EDI, punch out,
Right.
ecom, and it's an even smaller portion of overall B2B revenue. But the compound annual growth rate forecast up until 2030 is like 19.5% per year,
Right.
compound annual growth rate
Right.
between now in terms of the growth of B2B e-commerce
Mhm.
revenues. That's the compounding rate. And in B2C, it's only looking at like between a 2 and a 6%
Right.
compound annual growth rate in e-commerce between now and 2030. So we know that we're seeing it's going to be well more than double, possibly triple the growth rate in B2B e-commerce until 2030 versus B2C. And so I think we've been, all of us who have been working in the industry have been pushing really hard on that boulder at the top of the hill.
Mhm.
And it feels like we're cresting the top of the
Yes.
hill now. But and it feels like it's just at that tipping point now. But to your point, I think there's a few things that still have to happen for B2B e-commerce adoption to happen at scale. I
Mhm.
think one is massive data effort. We're talking every single brand that I work with needs to do both product and customer data work, like, and
Mhm.
usually a fairly substantial amount of it, before they can adopt digital channels because they're just not ready. They've got product information strewn across their entire business and a lot of institutional knowledge in salespeople's heads that they need to get out of those salespeople's heads, and they need to get into digital formats. That's probably one of the single biggest barriers to adoption I see. And even where businesses have the budget and they're really excited and they want to do e-commerce, the thing, and then they go, man, we want to be live with an MVP in the next 6 months. And it's all gung ho. And it's maybe even from the top down, from the board level down. What stops them usually dead in their tracks is when we take a look at their product data. And I think, to your point, I think AI is starting to help with that. There's a few vendors out there that have AI technology that can enrich products, can pull information from suppliers in any format, streamline that, turn it into structured data in ways that we've never been able to see before. There's a couple of vendors off the top of my head I know that help with that specifically in the B2B space. So that gap is being closed, but it's still a bridge too far for some brands because it's a real effort. And for any B2B brand that doesn't see data as an asset, they're going to struggle. You have to see it as an asset. You have to see it as an investable asset that's worthy of putting time, effort, and money into and resources around. Otherwise, you're never going to get there.
Right. I totally agreed. And it's interesting because we just launched a service called SKU Factory, which is essentially enrichment of data on the fly, doing it quickly. And I really wanted nothing to do with any, I know how sticky product data is. I always say there's two types of people: the people who know how ugly product data can be that work, and people who don't know anything about it. And both share the same thing. Nobody wants to touch it. Right. So it's just messy. I didn't want to have anything to do with it either, but the AI tools that we're using and things like that have made it so much easier and so much faster. And it's now so much more doable for so many companies. But I think the other side of it, and we just launched a practice around this as well, is the customer data side. And this is the side that nobody has talked about and that nobody really has addressed whatsoever. And we launched a practice recently to help customers understand, like, what data do I need to collect and what can I start doing with it? And we can talk about some of those things as it relates to revenue workflows later on. But the reality is that this is what's going to dictate success in B2B. It's understanding how to solve those B2B problems with data. And I spoke about this actually at the AD e-commerce conference here a few weeks ago, making data actionable. Well, what does that mean to a lot of folks? So we have this concept of actionable insights, right? Data that gives us some way of looking at the world so we can interpret it and make a decision. That's cool. But I think the reality is, and if you look at even what Gartner said in 2018 in their report or whatever about B2B, that 60% of B2B companies would be using data-driven models, right? Data-driven models, that means data and action. And actionable data is cool. Being able to automate some of those things, I think, is really the ultimate reality.
And I think you raise a very good point, which is that when I go in and I start consulting to a lot of the businesses I work with, when I ask, usually one of the first things we do when we get into discovery is I ask for a sample of some product data, maybe 10 products representing at least one product from every category that they cover, so I can see what the base state of the product data looks like. And then I ask for a sample of 10 accounts worth of customer data. So all their users, what addresses do they have? How do they structure their data? How do they generate price lists for these customers? Is it by location? Is it by user? How do they structure their customer data? How do they track interactions with those customers through maybe a CRM? What data do they have around behavioral data around those customers? Do they even track behavioral data around those customers? What products do they have access to? Do they have restricted catalogs or wide open catalogs? If they have catalog restrictions, why do they have those restrictions and how do they reflect those in, say, an ERP? And what I find oftentimes is that one of the messiest parts of customer data is the price lists. That is the one area where we oftentimes see super messy data. But then in the other area, which I think this will segue nicely into some of the things you're working on over at Flywheel, is the fact that in the B2C and D2C world, CDPs, marketing automation platforms, email and SMS technology, it's very mature, it's very advanced, and it allows you to do personalization and personalized communication at scale, and allows you to do segmentation at scale in a really automated, streamlined way. We don't really have that in the B2B world. We have CRMs in the B2B world,
Right.
but it's very rare. You don't really see. If you look at what happens in the B2C and D2C world, it's the Klaviyo's of the world, it's the dot digitals of the
Right.
world, it's the CDP technologies like the Lexers, like the Maps,
Right.
like the Segment IO technologies. But we don't have the equivalent of that
Right.
technology, and we don't have the equivalent of personalization technology in the B2B world yet. It's starting to
Right.
get there.
Yep.
And when we think of front end website experiential personalization, there are some technologies that have really started to nail down B2B. If we look at Bloomreach, for example,
Mhm.
they have gone all in on B2B in terms of website front end experiential personalization,
Right.
from site search, product recommendations, etc., taking
Mhm.
into account the restricted catalogs, custom pricing, quote requests, taking all of that into account, but also personalizing it in a very different way to how we personalize in the B2C and D2C world. In the
Right.
B2C, D2C world, it's usually wisdom of the crowd personalization. And so it does take some behavioral factors of individual users into
Right.
account, depending on the technology. But in the B2B world, where I think we have one of the single biggest gaps that I've ever seen in the tech stack is marketing automation and CDP
Mhm.
technology.
Yep.
That just is there's nothing really hyper tailored outside of the CRM space. So of course,
Right.
we have the CRMs, but the problem is CRMs in the B2B world are operational. They are
Right.
not marketing technology. They're operational technology. So CRMs are usually used for two primary things, and I'd love your feedback on this.
Right.
They're used for two primary things in the B2B world. They're used for customer service as effectively a help desk and
Mhm.
ticketing system,
Yep.
and they are used as a sales pipeline management system. That is primarily what CRMs are used for. They are not used to drive effective, personalized marketing messages to customers. And so there's still a massive gap there. There is no good marketing automation technology in the B2B world
Right.
yet.
Yeah, but I appreciate the yet. The a couple things there with what you just said. When you look at customer attribution, what does that mean in the B2C world? Customer attribution in the B2C world generally has to do with like behavior, like online behavior, right? What Google search term did they use? What product listing ad did they come from? What did they do online? What pages did they access? And so you're talking about massive amounts of data that get rolled up into tools that kind of make those decisions. That's why it's automated. And the market has been there, the ability and the market for suppliers or for vendors to be able to get paid for that, to create that automated technology. It's really not been that way because in B2B, it's less about customer attribution, is less about behavior as it is. It's partially about behavior, right? It should be about behavior, but it's additionally about market segment. It's about industry type. It's about lots of other things. And so those all have to be meshed together into what is customer attribution. And so really, when I was talking about the customer data before, like to me, that's where it has to start. Customer attribution. What is the source of truth? Where is it coming from? How do we access it? And what are we going to use it for? And I think those are all things that are yet to come.
And I think that when we want to engage with a B2B customer, oftentimes I see two kind of avenues of communication in the B2B world. Maybe they will have, and not all B2B brands even have this. Some of them will just have a regular old newsletter, and it will go to every single B2B
Right.
buyer that they have. It will be
Right.
like the monthly update of the business. Okay, here's what we're doing. Here's some new categories of products we took on, blah, 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 blah. Then we have the one to one communication that happens between the sales rep
Hmm.
and their book of customers, their portfolio of customers, where they'll send that out of their email account. They'll send that out of Gmail, or they'll send that out of their Microsoft account, whatever it might be. They'll send it out of their business email address, but they're sending it just like they would send a personal email one to one. And so maybe they'll send an email update to a specific customer. Oh, hey, we've got this new category. We've had this new product that's come in. I think it might be of interest to you. Do you want to learn more? Here, I've attached a PDF of a spec sheet about this new thing that we've got in that I thought might interest you. Here you go. But but that is, neither of those, in the case of a generic company-wide email newsletter, that's not tailored, it's not personalized, and a very small percentage of that may be relevant to the recipients, right? Then in the other case, the one-to-one emails that sales teams, customer service, inside sales, account managers, whatever you want to call them, the emails that they send, those usually are not scalable. And
Right.
they will miss things. And it all comes down to how busy the sales rep is. It all comes down to how much free time and how important it is to them that they stay in regular communication with their customers. It depends on how tech savvy they are to a degree. There's a lot that goes on. And so there is a massive gap
Right.
between those two things, in my opinion, where we want to scale, we want to automate and scale the types of personalized emails that sales reps send, but we want to wrap an automated, digitalized, ideally AI-driven process around that. And that they've already mastered that in the B2C world.
Yep.
Now we need to bring that to the B2B world. That's
Right.
the lens I see things through.
And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. B2C has already figured out how to build e-commerce business. Really, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is building e-commerce, right? So there's a number of B2B brands that have HubSpot. HubSpot's a great tool, but it's not designed to build e-commerce. HubSpot is an inbound marketing tool. And for new leads for the sales team, great. Good opportunity to use HubSpot as a content marketing tool, get some new leads, nurture customers, things like that.
Plug it into your
But those
CRM if necessary, etc.
Correct. Yeah, or use the CRM included in HubSpot, whatever it is. That's all good stuff for the sales side in terms of lead gen, but none of that's going to grow your e-commerce business. And I think that's where B2C has really figured this out already. If you look at B2C, the brands that make it, the brands that do well, the e-tailers that build sizable revenue online and stuff like that, they know how to do it. It's the product listing ads, the Google search words, all of the retargeting and all that stuff, all those other outbound strategies that are out there to get traffic to the site are all basically built to get a customer, right? And when they get that customer, the value of the customer is not the transaction, right? The transaction they probably just broke even on or maybe even lost money. The value is having the name to market to, right? It's the marketability and the opportunity to grow that customer over time through customer retention marketing. And so B2C has figured that out. And really that's what we're working towards here with the B2B side of things.
Indeed. And I'd love for you mentioned off air that you've built this new, it's a technology platform, but it's also a service layer as well. So you've built a new piece of technology, which is effectively marketing automation specifically for B2B brands. And
Correct.
you've brought a service layer to this that says, look, it's a recognition, I think, from your side that you say, look, even if we gave the most powerful marketing automation tools that we could build around the B2B sector into the hands of B2B operators, the challenge is that many B2B brands, in my experience, don't even have a marketing team. They oftentimes will have a sales team, they'll have a
Right.
customer service team.
Right.
They might have a quasi head of marketing, but usually it's a head of sales and marketing. And so they look at marketing through the lens of sales, and they look at their sales team as the marketers of the brand
Right.
and going out there and securing new business and drumming up demand. And so they look at B2B brands mostly, not all in all cases. So I don't want to,
Right.
tar
Sure.
everybody with the same brush.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, B2B brands are pretty bad at marketing. I'm talking product brands here. They
Yeah.
usually tend to be pretty shit at marketing. And as a result of that, if I'm reading between the lines here, you've built a technology that you say, even if we build the most amazing piece of technology, there's not necessarily anyone inside that business that could even use this technology or drive
Right.
it forward. So we need
Right.
to also wrap a services layer around this.
Correct.
And that services layer has to be expert at B2B, especially retention marketing in the B2B world.
Yeah. And I actually I think I want to rename it for B2B. In B2C, it's customer retention, right? Because you want to keep the customer on the hook. You want to keep them coming back. You need that, right? What I really want to focus in on in the B2B space is customer amplification, right? Like we want to take a customer that we've had for a number of years and who already trusts us, and we want to be able to use data and other events that we pull out of the store or the CRM or whatever it is, and we want to use those to drive campaigns that bring more revenue back to the store. So revenue workflows, right? So whether it's somebody who just created a new account but they're an existing customer, right? We already have purchasing history for them, right? So we have data. We serving up a dynamic email that shows the products that they've ordered in the past and the SKUs they ordered the most. Those are the things that are going to do what I call the B2B engagement model, right? So there's an event, right? Somebody created an account, somebody was in the store, added to a list, started a quote, whatever it is, right? There's an event. And then we're going to use data, related product data, past sales history, whatever it is, segmentation data. We know that they're in the MRO space, whatever it is. And we're going to let all of that drive a revenue workflow that goes right back into the store. And by the way, once a transaction occurs in the store, leads to more revenue workflows, right? And so this process keeps going so that one campaign turns into two, that turns into four, that turns into eight. And this is how you build a business. And this is the way they've done it in B2C. We have, in my opinion, a much greater opportunity because we have more data. We are already working with customers that we probably have a relationship with, or we at least know what segment they're in, and we have data based on that segment. So we have data. We have the trust of the customer, and there's going to be more data created because of the transactions, more line items and more orders and stuff like that. So anyway, the opportunity is huge in B2B, and what Flywheel B2B is the opportunity to build these revenue workflows, and it's a done for you model. We handle all the setup, we handle all of the programming and the automation and everything that goes along with that, because the one thing I've learned about B2B marketing departments over time, and I think it's good to segment here because you have manufacturers, right, who are in the B2B space. They have brands, right? And their marketing departments in many cases can be fairly sophisticated, and they'll have sizable marketing departments, but oftentimes they're very busy with the web, with new product launches, with
Marketing to distributors who they want to carry their products, etc.
trade shows, everything else. And then you have distributors who tend to be a little bit leaner and meaner, especially in the marketing side of things. And many of them are still trying to understand, how do we grow e-commerce? And so in both of those spaces, due to bandwidth or knowledge or whatever, I didn't want any of that to be an issue. We want to help B2B companies grow revenue fast, because that's really, I think, this tipping point we're talking about earlier. We're on the precipice of that before too long. And it's going to be about who gets there the fastest and the best that's going to survive, honestly, or thrive at the very least.
I think you make a very good point around the percentage of revenue that is attributable to e-com. And in the B2C and D2C world, if you're not getting, let's assume you're omnichannel and you're not a pure play e-commerce brand. Let's
Right.
say you're an omnichannel brand. You got physical retail stores, you sell through e-commerce, maybe you also sell through marketplaces, maybe you
Right.
sell through social selling, but you're omnichannel. If you are not getting at least 20% of your revenue from
Right.
digital channels in the B2C world, you're considered a laggard. You're considered an absolute laggard. You don't know what you're doing from a digital marketing
Right.
perspective if you cannot drive a minimum of 20% of revenue. Because if we baseline it and we look at about 22% of total retail sales currently in the United States are done through e-commerce, it's closer to 30% in the UK. So it varies. But if we benchmark that, if you're lower than the national average of total percentage of e-commerce as a percentage of total retail, then you're a laggard. You are underperforming what the average demand is out there for digital channels. Now, in the B2B world, when I go in and I work with most brands, they either don't do e-commerce at all yet. And so they're bringing me in to implement e-commerce for the very first time, or they've got an e-commerce website that's on some server down in a closet somewhere that doesn't get used, doesn't get recommended because it's shit. They've had it for 10 years. It's pretty average. They don't really update it. And it's just a really pretty crappy experience. There are some outliers that are outstanding in B2B and they're looking to just move it to the next level. But I would say they're the exception as opposed to the norm. And so what I see is that when I go into most businesses, either they're doing $0 in e-commerce today, or if they have e-commerce, it's 5% or less of total revenues are done through e-commerce. And so when I say we have a lot of ground to cover in the B2B world from an e-commerce perspective, I mean it, because it's not a significant revenue driver for a huge amount of B2B brands. And to your point, I think they're concerned, or they have a lack of resource and a lack of knowledge and capability in their business across the entirety of digital channels, both digital marketing channels and digital transactional channels. And this is a real limitation Even if a B2B brand sees the writing on the wall, like the B2C and D2C brands did a decade ago, even if they see the writing on the wall, or a son or a daughter is taking over from a parent or a grandparent, and they want to move the business forward digitally, the reality is that there are not a lot of us out there that have deep B2B experience and deep e-commerce experience that can come into these businesses and rapidly upskill them. There's just not a lot of resources out there, and there's a resource crunch. So I think what you're saying is, I've recognized there's a resource crunch. I've recognized that there is not a lot of great digital marketers out there, and specifically retention marketers out there in the B2B world. So I'm not only going to provide the technology, but I'm also going to provide the services to help them get up to speed very rapidly with this digital channel. Hey team, I have a big favor to ask you. Please pause this episode and send the link of this episode to someone you know that you think would enjoy this content. Really appreciate you spreading the word. This is how we grow. We're not a Joe Rogan. We don't have big, massive advertising budgets, but we absolutely want to grow. We want to get the learnings from all of these episodes out to as wide of an audience as possible, and we need your help to do it. Thank you, and now back to your listening.
Absolutely. It's about velocity. In B2C, they know this. And what's interesting about, you're talking about some of the retail brands or whatever, what's interesting is that those same brands that probably have 20 to 30% of their, first of all, you've got retail, right? And then you've got e-tail. You've got companies that only live online. So
That are pure play.
100%, yeah, 100% of their revenue is online. But let's the forest through the trees, right? How many malls do we see around us that are drying up? Big brands are taking their stores out of the mall, and they're investing in their digital channels, especially their e-commerce channel. And why? Because that's where they're making their money, right? Everywhere else, they're breaking even, right? And when we look at what that means for B2B, we talk about lean management, right? This is a philosophy in manufacturing, and many distributors have taken this and adopted these same philosophies. And I honestly think one of the challenges we have in B2B is that there's some people who really wonder, does it really matter how much e-commerce revenue I generate? Does it matter if the transaction's digital or not? I know my customers are going to the website and they're accessing products because when they call the sales rep, they reference what they saw online. Okay. Why the digital transaction is going to be the most efficient transaction, and it's the most valuable transaction. I think this is what B2B hoping that we can get to a point where we understand. It's important for two reasons. First of all, customers in again, going back to the lean principles, right? Customers pay us for things that are valuable, right? A transaction is not valuable to a customer. It's not something they want to pay for. Advice, support, service, all those things they want to pay for, right? Those are all things that they're willing to pay for. But a pure transaction is not something that, from a perspective of lean, adds value to the customer, right? It's all the other things that go around that transaction.
It's a cost center for them, right? Even placing the order, the amount of time it takes them to do that, whether it's 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or an hour,
Exactly.
that 100% of that time to them is dead money.
Right.
So the faster that they can place those orders, because they're doing it as part of their business operations. So procurement is a business operation, and it's a cost center. Procurement is a pure cost center to these businesses. The faster and easier that they can complete a transaction whilst buying and identifying the right products that they need in that transaction, the more valuable you are to them. It's just that simple in the B2B world. And I think the other thing that is worth bearing in mind, there's probably two standout things to me. We are now getting a huge amount of traditionally D2C brands wanting to de-risk their channel mix, and they're coming into the B2B world for the very first time. They're establishing strategic wholesale channels, and they might be expert at digital marketing in the D2C world, right? But all of a sudden now they're in this brave new world of B2B, and they're going, none of my systems and none of my processes really work the same in the B2B world. And so now I need to have different tooling. I need to have different capabilities. I need to have additional digital capabilities in the B2B world. If I want to do this B2B thing and I want to make my customers happy, and I want to scale within the first 18 months of my B2B business, if I want to get that to say 25% of revenues of my brand, I'm going to have to do this really well. And so that tooling doesn't really exist in the same way in the B2B world yet. And the other thing I would say is that when we look at the percentages of where this is going, yes, some B2B brands are establishing D2C channels. That's happening too because they get richer customer data, they get end
Right.
consumer data that they don't get when they're selling maybe just into the channel. But I think we are going to see a much bigger, if we were to compare the percentages of B2B brands trying to establish a D2C channel, I think we're going to see a much greater percentage of D2C brands establishing B2B channels. And because they're new to this over the next decade, because they're new to this, they need tooling that makes sense to them.
Mm.
They need tooling that more closely approximates the tooling that they're used to having at their fingertips in the D2C world.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I come at it starting at the end and working backwards. And that is ultimately the digital transaction should be the most sacred thing in all of that. Yes, it's the most efficient, but secondarily, it's also data. When we have a transaction digitally, we have data. We have the ability to understand that there's related products that go with that, or that product actually has a replenishment period, that, that there's that it's part of a larger project or something like that. So we have the ability to then use that data to better serve the customer. So these revenue workflows that we design in Flywheel B2B, for instance, are all designed to reduce friction. It's all about reducing friction, right? Because as much as we can, that's what B2B engagement's all about. And in B2C, it's about a lot of things, right? It's about look, it's about design, it's about feel, whatever it is. In B2B, though, our buyers are trying to do their job better and faster. And so the more we can eliminate and reduce friction, the more they're going to continue to engage in the digital channels. And that's really, I think, been the challenge up to this point in B2B. And it's the opportunity that we have now.
I think the other thing that has become much more common in the B2B world, and I'd love your thoughts on this too, is that the smartest B2B brands, especially those that have come from a D2C background, they see their B2B e-commerce website experience as an acquisition channel, not just a replenishment ordering channel. And
Right.
in the same way that we have B2B sellers that are the next generation of B2B sellers and they're digital natives, and that's starting to come through the pipeline. And so, therefore, they expect their businesses to be able to enable and develop digital channels. We have a new generation of B2B buyers, and they are starting their search for suppliers online. So if I
Mhm.
want to buy widget X, I'm going to type widget X into Google, and I'm going to try to find out who is able to supply me widget X at scale. And if the seller's website is hidden behind a login and Google can't even index the catalog, then
Mhm.
you are not even going to be known as an available
Right.
supplier of
Right.
widget X. And so I think the entire mindset in the B2B world, it's not just retention marketing that needs a reset from a mindset perspective. It's also acquisition marketing that
Mhm.
needs a reset and a mindset shift. So sure, maybe you don't without the customer being authenticated, maybe you don't show prices, maybe you don't show inventory, maybe you don't show MOQs,
Sure.
but you bloody better well at
You better have it.
least show your catalog. You at least better have your catalog be indexable so that Google knows what bloody products you carry, especially at that long tail end of the catalog, the keyword long tail. If Google can't index it, it can't show it. And I think this whole mindset behind I don't even want my competitors to even see what I carry. This mindset is an old school mindset that does
Yeah.
not take into account the opportunity cost of not being visible
Right.
in Google and in other search engines because, oh, that's not how we've ever done it. We've always had field sales that have gone out and taken physical catalogs to our
Yep.
customers and onboarded them. It's
Yep.
a ridiculous legacy mindset that is
Yep.
holding B2B businesses and brands back, in my opinion.
Yeah, product discovery obviously is a huge issue in B2B. The value of a SKU term is oftentimes worth its weight in gold, right? So you better make sure it's on your site. You better make sure that at least you've got the 80/20 rules of SEO done correctly so that everything is indexed correctly and all those things. And again, a really great place where AI can help with a lot of that really fast and really well. So yeah, and what's interesting is when you look again, getting back to the tipping point that we're talking about earlier, and the fact that I really hope B2B brands understand they have to increase the rate at which they're growing e-commerce, because there will be winners and there will be losers. And one of the things from a B2B perspective that I love is when I've been at conferences and listened to some of the executives from Granger or MSC or whatever, they're not talking about their SEO. They're not talking about their product listing ads. Do they do that stuff? Sure. Yeah. They're spending money on all that stuff, I'm sure. What keeps them up at night and what motivates them every day is to figure out what their customers are doing, how to reduce the friction of that, and how to deliver something digitally that that does that, that reduces that friction. And what they know is this: if they do that well enough, especially in the B2B spaces they're in, other people will tell they'll tell their the one thing about B2B is there's so many associations and there's a lot of
Trade
networking that goes.
associations,
Correct.
etc.
Yeah. They will tell their trade partners, they will tell their associates, they'll tell their colleagues. And I think focus on the customer, right? Focus on adoption and engagement, continual adoption and engagement. And in the end, you'll get the best of both worlds, right? You've got to have the product discovery side from an SEO perspective so that people can find you off of Google or whatever it is. But if you build the right tools, they'll not only want to get an account, but they'll be with you long term.
And this actually is, even when I think back to my first e-commerce business back in the beginning when I was selling memory cards online, and I was the first, myself and my business partner, our business was the first pure play business of its type in New Zealand at that time. That was when memory cards were very expensive. A 32 megabyte memory card was
Right. I remember
$650.
I was in the photography space at the time. I remember.
It was crazy. It was
Yeah.
crazy. And then 64 meg cards came out and everybody was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing. I have more space than I'll ever need in my life," etc. But what I found was when we were, because we sourced internationally as well as domestically, depending on where we could get inventory, where we could get the best prices, etc. And I noticed that when our suppliers and almost all of our international suppliers, bar one, they had no e-commerce experience. And so we found ourselves buying less from them just because it was harder to buy from them. Not
Right.
because we didn't want to buy from them, just because it was harder, it was more time consuming, it was more complex, and oftentimes we didn't know the full range that they carried because we were thought to be in maybe a specific niche or a specific category
Right.
vertical. So when the sales rep that was assigned to us would send us maybe an email with the latest spreadsheet update, they would send us a subset of things that they thought was relevant to us, but they were making that judgment call, not
Right.
us. And we potentially would have bought a lot more things off them. And in fact, in some cases, we would ask, "Do you also carry these types of products?" And they would go, "Yeah." "Do you want to carry those types of products?" "Yes." "Can you send us the spreadsheet for that category of products as
Yeah.
well?" But then, even if we looked domestically within New Zealand, there was a couple of major distributors of electronic products in New Zealand, and they all had e-commerce experiences. I think from memory, they all had them available. But there was one that was a standout that was super, super easy to use. It was super easy to
Right.
search. It was super easy to buy. And I would find myself dreading going to the other B2B supplier distributor websites because they were so difficult to use. They were so difficult to
Right.
transact. They were so difficult to identify products and find them. And I just put myself into the shoes of the modern B2B buyer. And I think if the bar is pretty low, the bar is pretty low.
It's
And so I think it doesn't take that much like B2C 10 to 15 years ago, the bar
right.
was pretty low.
Yep.
I think the B2B bar for e-commerce is so low right now that you don't have to do too many things right to become
Yeah.
the supplier of choice in your given vertical. What is your thought on that?
My thought is I completely and 100% agree. And again, for those of us who remember what B2C looked like 10, 15 years ago, we know that, and this is what bothers me a little bit about the mindset sometimes I think in B2B is B2C companies knew it too, right? They knew that there were problems with their site. They knew that maybe their product data wasn't optimal, but they continued to build the business in spite at the same time or parallel to improving these other experience aspects. And I think that's where B2B can really learn a big lesson about increasing velocity with your e-commerce business because you need to, and figuring out what are the things you can continually improve on, okay, rather than thinking that it's got to be perfect
From day one.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think really where we're heading to, what I believe we're heading to is a situation where, again, the transaction should be digital in the end, but there's going to be workflows. This concept of revenue workflows is one I've been playing around a lot more with lately because sales does need to be involved in some of these. Sometimes people do need they need some assistance or whatever, or they need to talk to somebody when they're ready to place the order, to the replenishment order, whatever it is, right? But the great thing is we can build workflows and still have the transaction be digitally.
And what I tell brands is that, okay, maybe we can't put 100% of your SKUs online tomorrow. Let's say, I don't know, let's say 20% of your catalog is super complex products that have to go through a really complex CPQ process or a really complex configuration process before you can even identify which SKU
Mhm.
you're going to be sent, or maybe
Right.
there's some components that are built to order or whatever it might be. That's fine. Let's deal with the other 80% or the other 50% of your catalog that straightforward. It's basically, here's a SKU, here's a price, here's the name of the product, here's a short
Yep.
description of the product, here's maybe one image of the product, and maybe here's some application detail of that product. Let's start selling that. To your point, I think the concept of an MVP, a minimum viable product or a minimum viable platform for B2B e-commerce, I think some B2B brands, they think, unless I can sell all of my catalog online
Right.
and digitally, then why even bother? But I think that overlooks something that you pointed out, which is that good is, or perfect is the enemy of the good, which is that we have to start somewhere. And
Right.
many B2C and D2C brands, they started with a pretty crap e-commerce
Right.
experience, to be honest.
Absolutely.
That e-commerce experience was not great.
You
And
called
even
them and they
site
would
search
tell you about it.
experiences.
They
Well,
knew exactly the problems.
and even the site search experience was rubbish.
Yeah.
It would show products that were totally irrelevant to your query. And oftentimes that came down to really poor product data, but it didn't mean they didn't do it, which is, I think, what you said, which it
Right.
didn't stop them from starting somewhere and then making iterative improvements over time in the areas that they knew. But the good thing is, by starting out with a relatively crap experience, they started getting feedback straight away. They started getting customer feedback. Oh, this doesn't work. Oh, I wish you had this. Oh, I wish you had
Absolutely.
more images. Oh, I wish you had videos. Oh, I wish you had 360-degree view images of this dress. Oh, I wish you had these category filters because I'm in a category and it's got 500 products and I can't identify the product that I want. Oh, they started getting feedback from the market almost immediately, and I think that's something that B2B brands can learn from too. That feedback is invaluable.
Absolutely. So I think there's a couple of things there. The first is that this iterative approach, it really, I think B2C understands, and I think in B2B, this is a little bit of a challenge because, and this is where we get into the fact that digital's new in B2B, right? So everything had a beginning and an end in B2B, right? An ERP implementation had a beginning and an end. Yes, you still continue to work on it, but basically you had a go live date and there was something you would modernize on the factory floor. You bring a piece of CNC equipment in, it comes in, it gets set up, and then you're done. So the thing that I think B2C understands, and that hopefully B2B will understand more over time, is that you're never done. This is never done. We're just improving on everything and we're getting better each and every day. It's never going to be done. And so, yes, this iterative approach, being able to build the business while you're building the tool better, is something I'm hopeful that in B2B we can really start appreciating and applying a little bit better over time.
And when we start thinking specifically about Flywheel, what systems are you tending to, on average, bring data in from? Are you bringing it in from an ERP, an existing e-commerce website, from a PIM system? Where are you gathering your data from to be able to bring these smart revenue workflows
Yeah.
into these businesses?
So the short answer is we can bring it from anywhere. Obviously, there may be some customization that's involved in that, depending on what the business system is. But I think obviously product data can come from a PIM or it can come from an e-commerce platform, whatever the source of truth is there. We're essentially the what Flywheel does is essentially it closes the loop, right? It's not here to invent anything in terms of storing data or anything like that. What Flywheel does is leverage and use the data that you have to build workflows.
Fantastic. Look, we're coming down to the end of our time together, but I think, look, this is an exciting conversation. When we think about Flywheel, you were describing about where you ingest data from. and how that helps you do what you do. And so sometimes you obviously get product data maybe from an ERP or a PIM. I'm guessing you connect into CRMs for some of the number of contacts we're having, and maybe even bucketized information about what that's about, what categories they buy from, how frequently they buy, etc. So maybe just talk us through where you tend to gather all your data from and how that tends to help you perform better. Because when we think about the communication channels, you're primarily managing email and, I'm guessing, SMS as well, text.
Yes, email. We can't do SMS. It hasn't been something we've done much of at this point, but we can do it. Obviously, the permissions are different and other things are different. But I think primarily, and again, we're talking about B2B here. At this point in time, it's still fairly simple. If we can get some data out of the CRM, segmentation type data, if we can get some ordering history from the ERP, if we can get, I guess one of the things I'm really excited about is the opportunity for API-driven AI tools that are able. This is where I'm hoping we're going to get to, and we're not there yet, but I'm hoping we're going to get to a point where many customers have their own AI data solutions, right? Something that's a report that's being rolled up every month on customer churn. And
maybe it's in their BI data tooling or something.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And that tool can stick into Flywheel the customers that are most likely to churn this month. And we can build a workflow that shows them some of the products that they've had in the past, for instance, and haven't seen you reorder these in a while, would you like to, and then build a workflow that says if they didn't respond, now it's time for a sales rep, right, to call and follow up. So anyway, I think there's a lot of different, it's B2B. So I think the key is that we stay fluid and loose to find out where customers have the data. The great news is I think that so many tools are AI driven. And we're not talking about like really complex data, pricing solutions or anything like that. We're talking about usually some basic customer data. If you have some basic customer data and some product reference data, you can put together some pretty nice campaigns. It's just a matter of, again, that's where the events come in and things like that. And those could literally come from almost anywhere.
Do you want to, or do you already also plug in real time to the e-commerce engine for certain platforms and say, look, they've abandoned a cart, or they've added a product to product comparison, or they have visited these categories, or they have, are you starting to think about, similar to how the B2C world does it, thinking about web behaviors and triggering off workflows based on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that to me is what I think will be, you look at B2B engagement, what I call the B2B engagement model, right? It starts with an event. Okay. And in as much as we can define that event, it could be anything, right? It could be adding a customer in CRM. It could be a customer looking at a part or a certain part in a category that actually fits into, that's a component to a bigger system that we sell, right? It could be any number of those things. And as soon as that event occurs, we have data that says, oh, okay, this SKU is related to that, or this buyer is new. Here's the purchasing history, right? We have data that comes into it, and then we build the campaign from there. So yes, these store events are critical, and I think that's really where the opportunity lies. Not just using the abandoned cart and checkout and all of the sort of core events that are already built into the store, but more importantly, being able to define them yourself, because you know your customers and you know what they're doing, and you've learned, and hopefully we can help collect the data that drives that as well. So.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And what's on your roadmap? If we look out 12, 18 months, what is on your roadmap for Flywheel that your customers are asking for that you don't yet do today, or that you say, hey, look, we think we're amazing, but we'd like to do these 2 or 3 more things by the end of 24?
I don't know that I want to answer that concretely, only because I think, to me, the important thing is what we're going to learn as more customers get on the platform, as we build more campaigns, as we build more revenue workflows, we're going to learn a lot. And that's what I'm looking forward to being able to share with our customers, right? Because the more we know, the more we can impart to our customers in terms of their campaigns. And that way the community gets better and better.
Love it. And how do you guys make your money? You said you're both a platform and a service layer. So I'm guessing you charge some sort of implementation fee and then maybe some sort of monthly subscription fee or something like that.
Correct.
How do you guys make your money?
Yeah, it's all rolled into a simple model. There's basically an onboarding discovery fee up front, and then it's a monthly subscription. And so everything, the service, the software, all of the reporting, everything goes into that subscription price. And we just try to make it as simple as possible.
And what would the average B2B brand be looking? I don't expect specifics, but ballpark, what would the average B2B brand today expect to be spending a month for the whole kit and caboodle?
I would say it's really going to depend on the complexity of the campaigns and things like that. But really, the model is set up to be anywhere from probably $3,000 to $10,000 a month, based on the client and the number of campaigns they're running. It should be very affordable for B2B companies. Honestly, most B2B brands will more than pay for what their first year output was going to be, or their first year investment, probably with the first campaign.
Wow. Absolutely incredible. And how do you like people to get a hold of you, Jay? I'll drop your LinkedIn profile in here. I'll also drop the link to B2B Squared in there. But how do you typically like people to get a hold of you to talk more about B2B and specifically maybe about Flywheel, et cetera?
Yeah, flywheelb2b.com. Put that into the browser. It'll drop you on the landing page. There's a form on the landing page. Fill out the form and let's talk about how it might work for your particular B2B brand, or what we can do to increase the velocity of your e-commerce store.
Absolutely love it. Now, as we come down to the end of our time together, this is where, and I did this the first time around and I get to do it again now. I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you and let you ask me one question, any question you like. It can be personal or professional. So Jay Schneider from Flywheel B2B, what is your question for me today?
My question for you is, what do you think is the biggest impediment to B2B companies having this mindset that we talked about before, which is, I need to continue to build the business, that speed is key? What are the biggest impediments to that, you think?
I still think that it's more mindset now. If you'd asked me this 2-3 years ago, I probably would have said it's a tech impediment. That there's other business functional impediments. I think there's two overarching things now that I'm seeing that are holding B2B brands back. It's mindset and it is developing capabilities. And I have to just be honest, we have fewer people in the B2B world that have those digital skill sets than in the B2C world. There's a lot more. The reality is there's still just a tremendous amount more people going into the B2C and D2C e-commerce space than in the B2B space. And I think that's sad, because I think that anybody who's looking at getting into e-commerce, anybody that's looking at developing a skill set around e-commerce, I think they should take a very long, hard look at B2B, because I tell you, the great thing about B2B is you're dealing with operators. You usually are dealing with technical people. You're dealing with IT. You're dealing with sales. You're dealing with people that are really looking to drive revenue in the business, and they're very focused on what they need to do, both technically and operationally in their e-commerce solution, both to run their business and create a really great customer experience. And so, unlike the B2C world, where it's mainly driven by marketing, it's mainly a marketing initiative. That's how they view how they view their digital channels. It's owned by marketing quite often, and therefore it's I like to call it the coloring in department. And so everything's got to be pixel perfect. It's all about brand. It's all about brand experience. It's all about driving desire and creating desire and being cutting edge. And it's all about the shopping experience, not necessarily the buying experience. And it's about cross-selling and upselling and how big our carts can be and AOVs, etc. In the B2B world, we're selling to accounts. We're not selling to individuals. And so I think in the B2B world, the thinking is much more long-term, out of the box by definition, because those relationships in the B2B world are so hard to acquire, and they're so hard to set up with credit terms and everything else, that everybody, both from the buying side and the selling side, we're always thinking long-term, right from the first engagement forward. It's how long is this relationship going to last? And oftentimes it's 5, 10, 15, 25 years and crosses multiple generations. And so I think anybody who's looking at going into e-commerce, they should seriously look at going into B2B e-commerce, because I tell you, the opportunity is massive. The pay is generally going to be pretty damn good because there's a shortage of resources,
Sure.
and they're going to learn a hell of a lot. And it's going
Yeah.
to be super interesting, and it's potentially going to be a lot more interesting than B2C and D2C, where the stack is pretty standard. It's Shopify, it's Klaviyo, it's whatever. And so I think the B2B is such an interesting business model. It's such an interesting way of doing business that I think people need to look at this as a world-class opportunity if they want to carve and hone their e-commerce skills and cut their teeth somewhere.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we've, over the years, we've talked about how, like B2B is not sexy, right? Going and working in or e-commerce at L'Oreal or someplace like that for Gap, that's sexy, right? Like you get to see pretty pictures all the time and pretty people and all that stuff. B2B is not sexy. And so we've had that same discussion with a lot of leaders over time. I guess my follow-up question to you is, how do you think we change that mindset? From somebody
I think
who's coming in at this a little bit newer than someone like myself, who's been in B2B their whole career. What are your thoughts?
I think we need more evangelists in the B2B space. This is more e-commerce evangelists in the B2B space. And I'm seeing even that change. And obviously I've burst onto the scene. I've only really been focusing super heavily on this from a content perspective for just over a year now. I'm trying to speak at as many conferences as I can. I'm trying to be an evangelist through my content. I'm trying to tell people, like in podcasts like this, hey, go into B2B e-commerce because it is sexy. It's super interesting. It's logistics driven. It's business. It's how business is increasingly getting done. I think we need to have people telling their stories, especially merchant success stories. I think that doesn't happen enough in B2B. Everybody tries to keep things close to their chest. They don't want people to know what their catalog is. They don't want people to know how much revenue they're doing. It's all secret squirrel stuff in the B2B world, almost top to bottom. Whereas in the B2C world, these retail brands, they love getting up on stage and talking about how sexy their brand is and what percentage of revenue is e-commerce and what the growth rate is and what initiatives they're doing that are winning in terms of customer loyalty and memberships and all that. Like they are an open book. The B2C world is an absolute open book.
Because led by marketing, right?
I mean, they look at it as a marketing channel. They look at going and speaking at conferences as a marketing channel.
Better is a marketing thing in and of itself. It's self-aggrandizing.
It's brand awareness. And I think B2B needs to take a page out of that book. I think they need to realize that you don't need to give away the farm. You don't need to get down to granular specifics. Oh, we spent $363,000 last month on a meta campaign and it drove this many signups to become accounts. You don't need to get into the specifics. You can even just talk in percentages, or you can just talk in trends. You can talk, okay, the trend is up and to the right at roughly this. You can draw that trend out and say, look, we've made these big investments. These are our big e-commerce and digital initiatives, and it's led to these beneficial results to our business. And I'm seeing the younger generation be a little bit more okay with that. The last B2B online Florida that I went to, there was some young guns there in the B2B space that were willing to talk about their B2B e-commerce successes from the stage. And I think the more we see of that and the more that we record those and put those out on YouTube and put those out on podcasts, and then that is what will attract people into the industry. If they're seeing people winning in the industry, then everybody loves to be part of a winning team. And that's what's going to draw people in.
Yeah. I think that's insightful. I appreciate that. I also think we need, I feel like sometimes like it has to start with the money, right? Like we need to be able to show the financial benefit and calculators and the stories of what people are thrown to the bottom line off of certain projects or whatever. I think these would be helpful too. I just feel like sometimes in B2B, it's so much more, it's about the business, right? It's not about an emotional purchase. It's about a business and the profitability of that business. So
couldn't agree more. Jay, I have thoroughly enjoyed our second conversation on B2B Commerce Corner on the E-Commerce Edge podcast, and I can't wait to do it with you. I can't wait to chat with you again soon, my friend. Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.